We'll be starting in just a few minutes. We'll start in just a moment. Let's get started. Welcome to the National University Speaker Series. My name is Dr. Nancy Rowland Heinrich, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Executive Vice President of Community Engagement for National University. I am proud to be the founder and host of our NU Speaker Series. So for the past several years, we have had more than 40 webinars with notable presenters and subject matter experts on a wide variety of topics. And welcome to those of you who have attended our NU Speaker Series in the past. The past sessions are all recorded. We'll be recording tonight's session, and please feel free to view those on the NU alumni website. Today, we certainly appreciate all of you attending, whether you are a student, an alum, faculty member, staff, or a community member. Our speaker series is certainly open to all participants. National University has a rich history in the San Diego area. We will be celebrating 54 years young in November, and always had a history of serving non-traditional working military students, providing accessible and relevant higher education programs. Currently, we serve more than 50,000 students who are enrolled in academic programs, well over 100 different programs, and National University is proud to now have more than 200,000 graduates and a combined alumni network of 240,000, which includes North Central University and JFKU graduates. We are very excited. This Saturday, we'll be hosting our 2024 National University Grad Walk, and we will be celebrating 585 new NU graduates. Today, we have a very unique topic entitled Navigating Hope and Hopelessness, Finding Meaning in the Silence Between. We are so proud to have Dr. Slosher as our speaker, as he is an NU alum. Sean's undergraduate degree is from Berklee College of Music, his master's degree in educational administration from NU, and he earned his doctorate in education in leadership and innovation at Arizona State University. Sean is a highly respected leader in K-12 education with more than 25 years of experience, both domestically and abroad, in educational innovation and school system redesign. He has a very rich academic portfolio in action research, experience as a progressive school administrator, a notable speaker, and truly an educational innovator. One thing that I found very interesting and admirable is that in 2019, Dr. Slosher was named by TED Ed as one of the most innovative educators in the world. Very impressive. Sean currently serves as the Assistant Superintendent of Vista Unified School District in Vista, California. He is a former CEO of Urban Discovery Schools, and he also led accountability and educational innovation in other districts. So that's a little bit more about Sean. For tonight's session, following the presentation, we will have a moderated Q&A. And I'm very pleased to share that today's moderator will be Heather Pedraita, the Associate Director of Alumni and Community Relations for National University, and in fact, an NU alumna. If you have questions, please submit them in the Q&A, and they will be addressed following the presentation. So audience, as you listen to our presenter, I am confident that you will find out more about navigating difficult times, whether you're in the field of education or other areas of leadership. So at this time, it is indeed my pleasure to turn the program over to Dr. Sean Slosher. Sean?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, and I'm truly humbled by your introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. It's not to avoid being seen. It's just sort of a good sort of outline for things. I wanted to start by opening up with just a little bit of my thanks to National University, but also sharing my National University story, as this is a National University alumni-sponsored event. So I wanted to thank our university president, Dr. Miller, and Dr. Cicero, our provost and chief academic officer. A special shout out to Dr. Lee, the head of Sanford College of Education, who I've had the pleasure of working with, to you, Nancy, and Heather, for all of your diligent work in preparing things together. Just a quick bit about my background to sort of frame things up as to what led to my National University story. Nancy gave a wonderful overview of my life and career around education, but she mentioned something that a lot of people don't perhaps realize about me, which is, yes, my first degree was in music from Berklee College of Music. And it was there, actually, I was also in Boston a teacher. And during that time, of teaching and of doing things, I moved overseas, engaged in a lot of things in Eastern Europe for educational practice and the development of education systems to support democracy. And we can dive into that on another day. But all of that culminated at one point of my coming back to California. That happened through a series of moves and things. And for those that may not be aware, when you move back into California, the California credentialing system is a little different than other places, and oftentimes you have to become reacquainted, re-credentialed in all things. And I got to a point in my career where I needed to get new credentials. And I was truly fortunate at the time to find a place such as National University that would allow me to do the things I wanted to do in my career and in my life. And I'm not sure what other university would have provided me that opportunity. For example, at the time, I had two young children at home, and I wanted to participate in baseball games and doing things. And the only way I could do that was to have some flexibility of my study time. And National University proved to be a place where I could do that. Now, the National University mission deeply appealed to me in every way, shape, or form. And for those of you that don't know it, it has to do with delivering accessible world-class student experiences by providing quality programs and services that ensure student success through meaningful learning. And one of the things that was unique about National is it was made up of professors that had been practitioners and could advise me as to how things were happening in school leadership and public education leadership and then the public sphere in California. And I deeply appreciated that. Now, National's vision is to provide an inclusive and innovative university. And in the spirit of innovation, I was constantly challenged in my National program to be someone that would transform not just educational systems, but look at societal transformation. And they constantly reinforce that as a value that we wanted to see forward. In addition, the national university values of ensuring a quality education, of innovation, of collaboration, diversity, and access, which have been with National for some time, really honed in on what is near and dear to me about the importance of educational practices and education. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to say thank you to a few people and just an update to them as a quick shout out, and then we'll get into our topic at hand. I wanted to thank Dr. Hobain, who was my EDA 618 law professor, and let him know that to this day, I still am updating my 100 most relevant cases on educational innovation, and I still teach it from time to time to assistant principals and principals. In fact, earlier today, I had a discussion with an assistant principal who called in regarding a particular issue, and we talked a little bit about school law. So thank you, Dr. Hobain. To Dr. Kurth, for supervision and instruction, thank you for a wonderful overview on instructional rounds and various strategies to be able to be used, which I've used throughout my career. To Dr. Reed for HR and diversity, I am still continuing to be someone who uses the 10-step frameworks that we covered in supervision of education. So thank you so much for that. In terms of curriculum assesses, Dr. Picas, I continue to look at various ways and theoretical models, and some of the arguments I make regarding school assessments and diversified school assessments and how we judge schools come back to our conversations in your class. To Dr. Kebe for finance, I am at this time working with the financial department of a school district. I've always worked in some capacity with finance, but I'm working to innovate how we approach financial systems, and a lot of the knowledge that you provided is still evident to this day. To Dr. Conniff, the philosophical courses that you provide were fantastic frameworks and groundworks for a lot of the work that I continued on in my doctoral program, and I'll touch upon briefly today. To Dr. Cloud, who taught our leadership course, taught it from a perspective of diversified leadership perspectives, from Eastern philosophical traditions to indigenous traditions, to different ways of looking at things, and really opened my eyes to different ways of seeing things. So I wanted to thank each of them, including everybody that was involved in my clear credentialing processes for all of those items and helping me to get to know California better. Even though I held various degrees before that and other items, National University made much of my career possible through their support and through a personalized education experience that was really designed to challenge me as a person. It wasn't just one thing for everybody. They really challenged me to reach down and find the best in myself. I have two special thanks of that group that I wanted to put forward. I wanted to say a special thank you to Dr. Joe Birdsell, who has retired from National University. Dr. Birdsell was one of my two personal advisors during the course of the program, but also during my transition from school site leadership to district leadership, and somebody who regularly took the time out, not just to call me, but to come and visit and talk and sit and confer and to really help me find a center in some very difficult times of district leadership. And finally, to Dr. Wayne Padover, who's been my personal mentor, friend, and somebody that I deeply look up to as a respected professional. Dr. Padover, to this day, checks in on me from time to time. And Dr. Padover, in addition, has provided me some of the best ethical leadership advice that I've ever had. In fact, at times of moral or ethical considerations, oftentimes I'll reach out to Dr. Padover. And for those of you that are enrolled in courses, know you never stop calling him Dr. Padover, even though he invites you to call Wayne the entire time. It's just something for Dr. Padover where he will come, talk with you, be a permanent part of your life. And that's part of my National University experience, that I was part of an educational, not just institution, not just a community, but a family of wraparound supports that continues to this day. So I wanted to open up by saying thank you to each and every one of them and welcome all of you to this wonderful series being put on. For our topic today, I wanted to just run through a few things and not necessarily go into depth on any one, but I wanted to also put up front that the purpose of this talk is not really a traditional one that we may have as different parts of the series. I did review some of the other series talks, and I found many of them useful, and some of them from some of my close personal friends that also were National University graduates and we interact with professionally. And many of those things are a little more of a style of providing background and career advice. And this one is a little different. This is more of a reflection of a career journey of the last 3 years. And I think the topic that I've become associated with most probably has to do with my dissertation, which was titled Hope as Strategy, the Effectiveness of an Innovation of the Mind. And Hope as Strategy became a 3.5, almost 4-year action research study on the operationalization of hope. And we'll dive into that here in a moment. What Hope as Strategy finally came out to be in dissertation form was a writing that was also a philosophical statement about where I stand in the world. And I do not regret my writing of Hope as Strategy or anything I wrote in it. But a lot of things that have happened since then have reframed concepts of hope, reframed my thoughts about the concept of being hopeless, and led me through a journey that involved a lot of self-reflection and a process of exploring the silence that comes with that self-reflection. And that's really the core of the 3 topics to be run through today. Again, these are not deep dives. This is an overview of a life and what this means. Now, when I talk about hope, I'm not talking about an esoteric sort of thing out there. And I'm not talking about something theoretical. What I am speaking to is a specific theory. And the specific theory has to do with the theory of hope. And hope in that theoretical model, which is part of a positive psychology notion, is not simply a desire of a different future or a more ideal future of our thinking. In that model, hope is made up of 3 primary things. The first are goals, some form of goals, either a positive goal or a maintenance goal or a negative goal, some goal that represents movement or stagnation. So positive goal might be something of, I want a better job. A maintenance goal might be, I want to maintain my job until my retirement. The negative goal is, I don't feel like this is really working for me. I want to maybe take a few steps back. So it's about that sort of goal formation. When I talk about pathway, what I'm talking about is the ability to envision and know what your options are and strategies are to achieve that goal. So hope has that goal format. It also has a pathway format. Can I get there? What are my options for getting there? And then the final aspect of this formation is the notion of agency. Agency includes the notion of personal motivation. What can I do? External supports, and also how I interact with pathway. And one key notion here on around this notion of operational hope is that these things all interact. That goal formation, being able to envision it, and having a sense of agency that I can change the world and that people believe in me all interact. So when I talk about hope, I'm not just talking again about that feeling. I'm not talking just about something that's out there. I'm talking about an actual thing that is a positive psychological theory. All right. Now, beyond hope, then what does hopelessness represent? For hopelessness, it's the collapse of one or more of those items and a feeling that it can't be done. And I would be remiss if I say, and I'll share here in a moment, that I have fallen into various steps and stages of feeling hopeless at times over the last 5, 6 years. It's been a time of tremendous challenge and change. And I want to mention that not in the terms of politics or in terms of world events or in terms of looking at things from a broader point of view of talking about the pandemic or what happened in there. I want to talk about it in a more global sense of a transition time for all of society and how we perceive things and not knowing exactly how to navigate through that. Now, for the third concept of silence, um, silence I want to frame up as it's perceived by me. Now, if we introduced in this topic in saying that my first degree was in music, that's all accurate. One of the things that's key in music is that music derives meaning through emotional states that are defined by both the presence of sound and resting or the absence of sound. But silence, as it's perceived by me, is a human concept that's not one that's just devoid of sound. To me, it's the absence of sound that we have come to pay attention to in our everyday lives. That's coupled with the sounds that we, for whatever reason, no longer seem to register, sometimes at all, even though they've been there all along. So when I talk about silence, it's sort of this moving away from the things we've come to expect and learning to sort of awaken to those things that have been there. And we'll talk about this just a little bit more here shortly. Now, the presentation today is not really a typical PowerPoint. What I've done is share with you some of my photos of the last several years that are reflective photos of various things. And I take a lot of what are called abstract photos, but these are all photos. They're not paintings and they're not modified. They're photographs that represent my feelings of various moments over the last few years. And to frame our conversation here with each photo, I'm going to go through some of these topics. So the first framing of this topic of hope, hopelessness, and silence really has to do with my age group and my generation. I am a Generation Xer. And I say that with full ownership of being a Gen X. I don't set that aside and claim I'm something else. But I want to frame this up by saying a lot of Gen X is not necessarily understood because there's not a single Gen X. Now, there's no single generation of anything. But for Gen X, we really are divided into two groupings. The first is the Generation X that has parents that are part of the silent generation, that generation that came right between the greatest generation of World War II fighting and those that became the baby boomers. And that's the first grouping of Gen Xers. The second group of Gen Xers are from baby boomer families. We're the latchkey kids. We're the ones that were told in that second half when we were growing up that we would probably be the first generations of Americans that would not have an improved quality of life over our parents. So it's a different framing. We're the generation that was subject to a variety of studies, including educational reforms around a nation at risk, that 1983 study that has so deeply shaped public education policy. And I'm part of that second part of Generation X. And it's important to know that and for me to reveal that because it does frame a lot of my thinking. It frames a lot of my thinking because of my educational experience. My educational experience, in large part, was also defined by one of my educational heroes, Dr. Thomas Payson, who was the superintendent of schools at San Diego Unified when I was a student there. And Dr. Payson was one of the first in the country to change education graduation requirements, something that I later would participate in a different capacity at a different time in my career. I was subject to as a student. And what Dr. Payson was saying is that the world was shifting dramatically and we needed to change dramatically the expectations for students and what they would achieve in the future. And Dr. Payson believed deeply in this, that we have an obligation to our children to prepare them for their future, not to perpetuate an education system of the past, but to redesign one. And in many ways, that's framed a lot of my thinking. And like many of my generation, in Generation X, we struggled to find our own voice. We wanted to make a contribution, but we sat in an awkward space. For my generation, when I was going through high school and moving into college, this was an interesting time. When I was in high school, it was the first Iraq War. And the first Iraq War was mostly fought by a previous first part of Generation X that were the children of the silent generation. we wanted to make a contribution and we had to find different ways to do that. And I found my way to make a contribution in several ways. One artistic, through artistic contribution, the other societal, through my contributions to education, which is why I ultimately have moved abroad to participate in the development of democratic education institutions, and why I've been privileged in a career to be able to continue that work and to do so. Now, part of the things that I have really treasured in my practice is something that I deeply have engaged in for a long time, and that's a reflective practice. And on every Friday for some time, I've engaged in a reflective practice that's based upon a Japanese or Eastern tradition called Hansai. And to put that practice in sort of scope, to the best of my knowledge, this is a practice of what would be called critical reflection. Not self-detrimental reflection, but highly critical of self. And as part of this, I've engaged in writing in other modes, whether it be through traditional prose writing or poetry or other things on Fridays, to try and center myself and understand things a little bit better. And most of my Friday reflections for some time also were shared with my immediate leadership team or my entire school or school system or district, depending upon where I was. Many of those items began with a single sort of opening that sort of warned everybody that I was free flowing and writing those things without a lot of guidance. In fact, one read, as with each week, excuse the disconnected sentences and typos, I free write these and do not edit, which was a big leap of faith for me as somebody that was trying to move forward in sharing these things. So part of that reflective practice came into play as I started publishing those. In fact, you can probably find many of those items still online, either on my website and other places. Those included topics such as, and I'm just going to review some of them over the years. And I know I have many guests here today, and I'm really honored that they would come out, people that have written to me over the years. There's posts on culture, on emergent themes and our values, on testing and testing systems, on redesigning educational experiences, on defining what an action means, on core belief, on pace. There's one on school shootings. There's one that is a friend of mine's favorite, which is on the meaning of desks and where desks sit in room. Others are on critical innovation and other things. So these became part of my regular practice until about 2/3 of the way through the pandemic. And I stopped writing. In fact, this is my first major time speaking out loud on a recording since my TED Talk in 2019. My TED Talk in 2019 was recorded in Edinburgh, Scotland. Nancy brought up I received an award, and I was humbled by that award. It's an award that you can't apply for. Other people nominate you from all over the world, and that's very kind. And I was truly humbled to be part of that, to go to Scotland to participate. But my TED Talk is very much a reflection, not just of some of my experience, it's a reflection of the pandemic itself. You see, my TED Talk was released on the day that the stay-at-home orders were given. In fact, we never really advertised the TED Talk coming out because we literally have the email chain going back and forth that said, we'll sort of announce it and put things on the web as soon as the stay-home orders go away. And of course, they didn't quite go away at the pace we thought. So there was a lot to the pandemic for many people, but there were very few places, quite like healthcare, public education, and those in social services, that seemed to be at the crossroads of so many critical topics. And those topics became intensely personal and difficult. And I'll share them briefly as I talk about some of the strategies that I've utilized as I've navigated this. So what drew me to hope? If we've defined hope as a positive psychological theory and where that comes from, it's actually from a gentleman named Schneider, who first proposed this item. My belief in hope goes back a long way. In fact, it goes back to a very simple poem that was given to me on my 21st birthday by my mother. In fact, in the book was inscribed to Sean on his 21st birthday, wisdom from my youth, love, Mom. And that poem opens up simply, go placidly amid the noise and the haste, and remember what peace there may be in silence. It continues, as far as possible without surrender, be on good terms with all persons. Speak your truth quietly and clearly, and listen to others, for even the dull and the ignorant, they have their story too. And the poem continues on for some. And that poem very much set the stage for this feeling that there were possibilities in the world. And I think that's what my mother was trying to convey to me at a time when I was about ready to make some major life decisions. Hope came back to me in several formats. I'm working in different places and different times. And as indicated in the opening, I've primarily worked in a branch of leadership that's known as innovation. Innovation being the process of introducing new themes, new topics, new way of being, or changing a system or transforming it. Hopefully, of course, for the better. Hope also has guided me as an educator through the years. Paulo Freire once said of hope that hope is an ontological necessity for those that are engaged in education, particularly in places of oppression or in places where people seek to find freedom through education. So hope became core. And really the reason why I gravitated towards that theory of hope theory is it helped me to understand better where those feelings came from in me. In my writings, I've never proposed that hope should be adopted as a theory by anybody. What I have proposed is that my theoretical frameworks, my way of thinking, my way of being, reflects my outlook and how I look at things. So what then is really hopelessness? What happened in my experience that led to a sense of hopelessness? Now, first, I want to put out there, I think we've entered a much healthier time about mental health, about speaking about ourselves in discourses, in ways that really are helping people. In fact, I'm incredibly privileged to work right now in a school district. I work at Vista Unified School District. I'm an assistant superintendent there. The opinions that I'm sharing are my own, but I feel fortunate to be in Vista where there's a focus on community schools, on whole child development, on really providing all of the fundamental frameworks and supports that children need to be a success so they can engage in academics and learning. That they don't see it as one versus the other. They see one as part and parcel with the other. So what happened for hopelessness in my sort of experience, the collapse of it? A lot of the collapse had to do with something that I think we all mentally think we're prepared for, but we don't necessarily know what to do with. And that is the collapse of the sense of agency, the sense, or what's called agentic thinking, the sense that we can do things. And that may be because, in my own case, a lot of the agency that I had come to feel about myself came from a variety of people, including people here that are listening in. A lot of people that I came to rely upon to help me believe in myself. And the reason why I came to a final conclusion why that was so necessary is because I wasn't so sure of myself, that I was relying upon all of those people on a day in, day out basis. And whether that's fair or not, I really can't speak to, and perhaps it's not fair at all. But part of the process of the pandemic was realizing how divided we had become on a variety of experiences, and we weren't sure what to do with that. Now, to be sure, I fully accept and own the decisions that I made during the pandemic. A lot of those were not necessarily bright spots, but some of those were very difficult spots. In the pandemic, I did lead a school system that was, to the best of our knowledge, the only one opened the Monday after the stay-home orders occurred. That's because we had prepared for weeks before for such an eventuality, and we had already distributed hotspots and computers and tested things and had all of our systems moved online. And we had engaged in all of that. But part of my pandemic experience is also things that many people did not agree with. We were in the inner city, and we were a school system that was among the first in the country to do vaccination mandates, both for faculty, staff, and to ask for students of a particular age to engage in that as well. And the goal there was we wanted to return to in-person learning, but we had lost so many members of our school community. Now, the response to that was not what I had expected. I don't seek out any form of media attention at all, but that does happen, as many of you know, within leadership, particularly school district leadership. It does happen. And I found myself on the news quite quickly. And with that, sort of as a catalyst for a division point on a topic that I believe is very near and dear to people in their heart. But some of the responses were ones that included everything from death threats to personal threats to people refusing to talk with me, including people that I deeply cared about and had respected. That led to a process of being curious about what might be next. What had occurred. And it took a long time in that reflection to understand that the hopelessness that had laid in was accompanied by a second part, which was a part that we don't necessarily talk about. One of my favorite leaders is General Colin Powell. And in one of his books, Colin Powell talks about something that goes sort of counterintuitive to a lot of what we learn about in leadership, because we learn a lot about leadership, about inclusion and being together and all of the things that go with it. But what General Powell talks about is an evening where he had to make one of the most consequential leadership decisions of his career, and then spent the evening in near complete silence driving around Washington, D.C., having to feel absolutely alone in the decision, that there wasn't anybody there. That sort of aloneness feeling for me went on for some time. And while we were able to get our schools open, while we were able to do things, it left me with a lot of questions and a lot of self-reflection that had to do with an awakening that needed to occur within myself. And it did lead to limiting to the amount of speaking that I did in public while I re-explored that self. I'm grateful during this process I got to meet a number of people who have helped me along that path. Whether they're on this call or not, I don't know, but I wanted to take a moment to thank Matt for his friendship over the last few years, and a variety of board members and others that have reached out to help renew my faith in learning to speak again and really encouraging that in me. Part of this process, I would be remiss in saying, was in that silence, realizing that there were a lot of things that I had not engaged in really difficult discussions. And I'm not ashamed to admit, but I think it's proper to admit that in the middle of all of that, I also became separated and divorced, that I had to go through a process of really coming back into me. And that silence culminated in a few events recently that I thought I would share before I start to close out this discussion of this journey. Recently, I had the opportunity to take my son out for a monumental birthday, his 16th birthday. And I decided that I would give him the same book of poetry that had so deeply impacted me. And I wrote on the cover of his book to Riley, my son, on his 16th birthday, wisdom from our family being passed on to you. Loved it. And presented him an original copy. I went through and found an original copy of that poetry book and spent my evening with him, talking with him, and hearing and enjoying him emerge into adulthood in hearing his thinking and thoughts. And one of the things that I learned through that is part of being passionate about public education, being passionate about these things. Part of the sound that I had been tuning out was the sound of the things I needed to pay more attention to, whether they be the day-to-day things and items, such as just sitting and talking with my children, or learning to really understand things deeply of what's happening around me by stopping and pausing and just observing the world. A second part of that journey was a trip up of listening to the sound of the woods and the ponderosa pines of Central Oregon, and visiting at my mother's house and revisiting those items and just taking a walk through the woods and realizing that in that silence is space to really understand what's happening within. And during those sort of journeys, what I realized is what I had been seeking over and over again, and what the silence was affording me was a space to understand that I had been seeking something that might not be reasonable. I'd been seeking external validation, that I was somehow seeking courage or solace or comfort from others, and had lost touch of the ability to do that myself. And that in sort of these times that have become difficult, that I needed to get back in touch with that part of myself. Now, in that self-discovery, as we close, I wanted to share with you something I used to share with my counseling team, which was called the cycle that was sort of, we called the downward spiral. That's where we said students would stop in a process of listening, start by this process of stop listening to their parents, then they would stop listening to their teachers, then their counselors, then their principals. Then they would stop in that spiral down of listening to outside mentors and authority figures. But the most dangerous stage is that they would stop listening to themselves. And that's where reason went out the window. And when I started to reflect upon that in my journey through the silence, I realized that there were some fundamental strategies that I needed to put back in place in my life that had not been there for a while. And I thought I would share those with you to close out. The first was seemingly simple, that we have to accept that we're human. And with that comes certain human attributes. In my TED journey, I had the wonderful opportunity to meet a TED speaker who reminded me that we like to think of ourselves as thinking beings who happen to experience emotions, and that's not true. We're emotional beings who happen to have rational thoughts from time to time. We need to accept that we do have these emotional things, and to divide the emotion and to see how the rational thinking compares to it. But you can't just make yourself devoted to emotion. And you need to accept that as part of our humanity. The second strategy that I needed to engage in was to learn to develop agency, but without an echo chamber, without seeking validation to your thinking through people that only think alike, but instead to open yourself to learning about agency through people who think dissimilarly from you. And that's not only okay, that's valuable. The next strategy up that I learned in order to cope with all of this was one that I talked about in my TED Talk, which was embracing ambiguity. But not just ambiguity, embracing that's part of being human, that we don't know. We don't have a certainty of knowing. That it's something that we just don't have as part of ourselves. The next strategy up was one that I took back to that poetry book that was given to me on my 21st birthday, which was having respect for others, But that doesn't mean relinquishing your authority of being fully in charge of yourself or turning over the fate of your future to any person. 3 more strategies that have helped me to start to emerge from that silence. I found while walking, talking, and being on the journey of the last 10 months, which is being comfortable missing the shots you take. Now, there's an old saying that you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, and I get that. I think that's a logical strategy. But we need to learn to be comfortable also missing the shots that you do take, but being sure that you take them and take full advantage of that. The next is one that I think we struggle with all over the place in public education, which is learning to be comfortable in speaking out loud and accepting that the vulnerability that comes with it will come with a high degree of criticism. But we need to be engaged enough in our belief structure that we accept that others' criticism is simply their perspective and point of view, and that they have to be welcomed to it. The final conclusion I came to was that this is a time of leadership, but it's a time of leadership that's in need of a deep reconnection to ethics, to principled innovation. And I returned to that from one of my previous superintendents, Mr. Bill Koba, who so dearly imparted upon us the need to have ethical frameworks in place at all time. And I've always been grateful for that. So those are the strategies that I've been engaged in order to help move myself from a place where I felt like I couldn't or shouldn't speak to one where, with Heather's encouragement and Nancy's encouragement, I wanted to share with you today. Going back to close on these topics and looking back at the last several years, and I see the slideshows falling behind, and that's just fine. I think what summarizes it best is sort of my closing remarks that came in my own writing of Hope is Strategy. And that was sort of a phrasing of a few things, but it culminated in a final paragraph that I still believe in is going to be critical for public education and for societal change. And knowing that National University values societal change, I thought I would close with this, which is in the final paragraph of that book. I've argued here that we must engage in a pedagogy of liberation, hope, and even defiance of the mainstay factors that may have institutionalized a caste system of poverty and oppression. However, my situated context was not some distant land that America regards as being of a different world order. Instead, I've asserted that this all happened and will continue to happen here, in the land that proclaims freedom for all. For our students, they deserve nothing less than the full and equal opportunity of that dream that we have come to call America. Rather than a dream that should be achievable for a privileged few, I truly believe we should be seeking out liberty and justice for all. And I thought I would share in this moment that I still believe in those ideas. I still believe that hope is an ideal strategy for moving our systems forward, and certainly one that works for me. And that even when you fall into a state of hopelessness, there are definitive strategies to help you move forward and find courage again. And with that, I thought I'd turn it over to you, Heather.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you so much for sharing that message. I think I speak for all of us that we learned a lot and have a lot to think about. And I do want to address a couple of questions in the chat since they came up. Yes, we will be sharing out some of Sean's resources in a follow-up email. You'll receive that in the next 24 hours. And we will also be sharing Sean's contact information shortly. So if you'd like to connect with him from here, we'll be sharing that out in just a bit. But first, I'd like to get to a couple of questions, if that's okay with you. We have quite a few that came in, but I want to address one that came in on the Q&A. Thinking about hope and its connection to education and then your role as a leader, how do you encourage and maintain that idea of hope among your colleagues? And then how does that trickle down to the students, especially when thinking about times of uncertainty or adversity? How is that something that you take a lead on in the field of education?
Thank you, Heather, and thank you for that question. I think first is in this time that we live in as educational leaders, words have often become politicized. And you can make a choice whether you choose to engage in that or not. I choose not to engage in that to the best of my capability. And why I say that is because it would be easy to say hope is identified with a particular political movement, political party, or political thing. And I sort of dismiss that because hope belongs to us all. That is a fundamental birthright of being human. Now, what you're hoping for and how you're looking at it may be a different strategy. But what I share with my colleagues on this is that our leadership position is one of both envisioning a more ideal future for society as we work with our communities together, but it's also a process of being resilient in a process of moving stepwise towards it. I'm reminded of a lesson I learned from my grandfather. My grandfather was a wonderful systems changer who I won't go into any depth on, but I learned a great deal from. But one of his messages to me before passing is he held my hand and he looked at me and said, you know, Sean, I wonder if you are prepared to engage in the act that is societal change because it's slow and it's painful. And he saw, you know, I think in me, somebody that was very eager to see change, as I am. But what I share with them is that if we believe in these things in our heart and our soul, that we have to have the longevity and the tenacity to continue over time, to continue to engage in these things. And it may not mean you get what you want right now, but it means we can't give up. We have to move forward. And that means having a belief in our system, having a belief in that more ideal future state, and having a belief in the possibilities of what our children can achieve. And having those talks can be difficult, but I think we owe it to our teams to do that. And I do my best to take part in that.
I think that's great, and I think a lot of that ties in with what you said about you touched a bit on innovation, and you had a great sentence there. And as I did my best to take notes, I wrote down the process of introducing new dot dot dot, right? Because it's really new, fill in the blank there. Talk a little bit about how the idea of new is really tied into hope and how those two things coexist.
Yeah, I you know, for me, and again, talking from my perspective, the idea of innovation and new is, first of all, innovation is the introduction of a new practice or thing into a system. It's not necessarily new to the world. It's new to that system. And sometimes it is completely new, but more times than not, it's simply moving things that have proven to be effective in one place and trying and modifying them in a different way. So that way we try them in another institution or social setting to see if it will be effective for us, right? So new and hope to me go part and parcel. If you look forward and believe in a more ideal future, if you believe in a more ideal future, then you become future facing, future forward, and obsessed with that sort of notion that something more positive can happen out there. And that's a different way of thinking of things versus that there was something that was perfect that somehow isn't perfect. Now, I want to frame this up by being really specific. I have felt that way and had that frame of reference for about 30 years. This is not a commentary on anything happening in the last 8 or 12 years. I've felt that way a long time. In fact, at one point, I think in a different career stage where I was a little more brash, I was working on school transformation. I think I said something to the effect of you hold the opportunity to either participate in the solution or wallow in the problem. What do you choose to do? I choose to participate in the solution, and I hope you'll join me with that. And I know I used words more harsh than that at the time. It was a different point in my life. But I think that concept comes in new because for those that believe that there are different ways of doing things and that we're in cycles, even if you believe in cyclical thinking and that we're going to sort of do things in a different way, it's still new. For every generation is set in its own on its own timetable, its own context. And I think one of the most important realizations that most of us have within social systems and as systems and organizational leaders is that we have to prepare the system for what's next. We can't try and prepare it for the past because the past is gone. Whether you use Deming as your model, Deming used to call this preparing for the change that's already happened, or if you use it, various other models to look forward to it, it's part of our obligation to society, our clients, whoever that may be, our communities in our case of education that we serve. That's at least what I feel in my heart.
No, that's good. And you've talked a little bit about today about the ideal future, the slow change of social change and societal level change. Um, and I think that ties in well with what you said a little bit about silence and being okay with that ambiguity of silence, the not knowing, the being uncomfortable with what's to come. So I'm going to tie that in with a question we received directly. This person shared, the notion of silence reminded them of a book they'd read recently, Wintering: The Power of Rest and Retreat in Difficult Times. You're nodding like maybe you know this one. And a critique of the book is that it reflects a privileged viewpoint in having the ability to enter a moment of wintering in silence that might not seem accessible to all. So, if you could just comment a bit on silence as a privilege and really how can we engage in silence when we feel we don't have the time or resources, or maybe we're in a part of society that doesn't feel like we can wait for that change and be okay with being uncomfortable. I'll leave you with that as our final question before we toss it back to Nancy today.
Sure. Thank you so much, Heather. I think there's two parts to that question. And if I can, I want to try and address them separately. One is the notion that silence is a privilege, that we may not have time for it. I directly try and make time for it. What I've found is you can either make time for it or it will make time for you. And that I understand that we get hunkered down in a busy schedule, our busy days and the things that are happening. I get up pretty early every day. I work till pretty late every day. And I do my best to honor the trust that I have in the position that I hold by dedicating it to myself, deeply to it, reading, studying, cross-checking, doing everything I can. But I learned about the importance of scheduling things a long time ago when I was a school site leader, in that if you don't schedule and take the time to do it, it just won't happen. So for me, it's a choice, and it's a choice to be made. And it's a choice that's a human choice that you don't need permission for. And it's not, therefore, for me, a choice of privilege. It's a choice that's about what you decide. And that's just my opinion up to the matter. I've chosen to reflect on Fridays and do other things. I've chosen to stop what I'm doing and to look at it. And there are consequences to that. There certainly are. But those are the choices that I've made. And I would encourage you to, make a choice that's right for you. So that's the first part to it. The second part, I think, is that oftentimes we become anxious for the change. There's a lot in society that I believe I would love to have an immediate change for. but I'm not sure that we fully understand that we took a long time to get into the situation we're in society. And for many cases, it may take a long time to get out. And oftentimes what we do is, in order to move quickly, what we do is we lose a lot of people along the way. And what we get is a lot of strife of people that don't understand what has happened. And I won't go into any depth on that. I've had several writings on that in the past, but the importance of making sure that we engage in community dialogue around these items is not to suggest that they should be deferred. It's to suggest that it's that important, that it's so important that we have to slow down and get and make sure that we're into this together. And I'm not suggesting that everybody has to agree. What I am suggesting is that we have to engage in a change process where people are informed, and to share that one. So that's the best answer I think I can give right now, Heather. But if anybody would like to write, or if there are additional questions, I'm happy to make written comments.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you so much. And I know that we're going to share your contact information here shortly. And just want to share with you, we had a lot of great feedback here in the chat. And in the question and answer as well, people expressing a lot of thanks for your message and everything that you were willing to share with us, your courage, your vulnerability, and your insightful information. So if you'd like to connect with Dr. Losher on LinkedIn, this QR code will take you directly there. You can also contact him at slosher.ted@gmail.com if you'd like to continue the conversation. Nancy, I think at this point we'll hand it back to you if you're available.
I certainly am. And again, Sean, we would like to thank you for sharing your art and insights. And I think that it was really helpful to all the audience. And, do speak again. It's time for you to present on this or many other topics. But thanks for sharing, especially I would say your vulnerability for a topic, but clearly you have a lot of people that know you, and the audience today truly appreciated your remarks. But at this time, I'd also like to thank Heather and the NU team for helping us coordinate the NU Speaker Series. Next month, we will be having a session that will be related to Veterans Day and honoring our military. But other upcoming events, we have an information session with information on degree programs, as well as alumni scholarships that are available coming up on the 24th. This Saturday, I mentioned in the beginning, we will have Grad Walk at the Sharp Previs Innovation and Education Center with 585 new graduates and their friends and family. And that will be great. Next week, Navigator Networking, which used to be called Chapter Chat. So please feel free to join us and welcome our new alumni in that session. A upcoming career transition seminar on the 29th. That will be at our Spectrum Center with Trevor Blair and Blair Search Partners. So that is an in-person event. And then on November 8th, the Whole Person Center will have a session called Helping Clients to Cultivate Gratitude. And the Whole Person Center is something that's available, a service to our students and alumni. So appreciate that. But again, thank you for joining us this evening. I hope that, you'll return and see we truly have a wide variety of topics with our speaker series, and really appreciate the time and the willingness of Dr. Losher to join us. And so thank you to everyone, and have a good evening.